The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Raven's Hollow Palace as Crown Prince Alexander walked slowly through the empty corridors. His footsteps echoed in the silence, each sound seeming to mock the joy that had filled these halls just months before. The palace staff moved quietly, their usual chatter replaced by respectful whispers and careful glances toward their grieving prince. Princess Isabella sat in the morning room, staring out at the gardens where she had once imagined teaching their child to walk among the roses. The untouched breakfast tray beside her had grown cold hours ago. Her lady-in-waiting, Margaret, hovered nearby, unsure whether to speak or maintain the heavy silence that had become their constant companion. The tragedy had struck without warning 3 weeks ago. Isabella had been in her 7th month of pregnancy, glowing with the anticipation of bringing the kingdom's first heir in over 2 decades. The royal physicians had assured them everything was progressing perfectly. The nursery had been prepared with the finest silks and carved wooden toys. The entire kingdom had been celebrating, preparing for the birth that would secure the royal line. But fate had other plans. A sudden complication during what should have been a routine checkup changed everything in a matter of hours. The palace's chief physician, Dr. Whitmore, had done everything possible, calling in specialists from across the continent. Yet despite their efforts, the tiny prince they had named Thomas after Alexander's grandfather never drew his first breath. Alexander found his wife in the garden pavilion where they had first discussed baby names. She was holding the small blue blanket his mother, Queen Evangeline, had knitted for her grandson. The sight of Isabella clutching that blanket broke something inside Alexander that he feared might never heal properly again. "The letters keep coming," Isabella whispered without looking up. "Thousands of them, from people across the kingdom expressing their condolences. Each one makes it feel more real, more final." Her voice was barely audible, as if speaking too loudly might shatter what little composure she had left. Alexander sat beside her on the stone bench, not trusting himself to speak. The weight of his own grief combined with watching his beloved wife suffer was almost unbearable. As future king, he knew he was expected to be strong, to provide leadership and comfort to both his family and his people. But right now, he felt like nothing more than a broken man who had lost his child. The palace chapel bells chimed noon, their beautiful melody now sounding mournful to both their ears. Father Benedict had offered to hold a memorial service, but neither Alexander nor Isabella felt ready to face such a formal goodbye. The very thought of standing before hundreds of mourners while trying to maintain royal dignity seemed impossible. Margaret approached carefully with news that the king and queen wished to see them for lunch. Alexander helped Isabella to her feet, both of them moving like elderly people despite being in their 30s. The simple act of walking back to the palace felt exhausting, as if grief had physically aged them overnight. In the privacy of their chambers, Isabella finally allowed herself to cry freely. Alexander held her as she sobbed, his own tears falling silently into her auburn hair. They had been so careful to maintain composure in public, but behind closed doors, they were simply 2 people devastated by an unimaginable loss. The afternoon stretched endlessly before them, filled with the same emptiness that had defined every day since the tragedy. Alexander tried to focus on correspondence from other kingdoms offering support, but the words blurred together. Isabella attempted to read, then to embroider, then to write in her journal, but nothing could distract her from the absence that filled every corner of their lives. As evening approached, they found themselves in the nursery they had so lovingly prepared. The rocking chair Alexander had commissioned sat empty beside the unused crib. Tiny clothes hung in the wardrobe, still bearing their tags. A mobile of silver stars and moons hung motionless above where their son should have slept. "We should close this room," Alexander said quietly, though his heart rebelled against the idea. "Not yet," Isabella replied, running her fingers along the crib's edge. "I'm not ready to say goodbye to this part of him, too." They stood together in the doorway, holding each other as darkness fell outside the palace windows. Neither knew how they would find the strength to face tomorrow, let alone the years ahead. The kingdom needed them to heal, to try again, to provide the stability and continuity that royalty demanded. But tonight, they were simply 2 parents mourning a child they would never hold, in a palace that suddenly felt far too large and empty for their broken hearts. The weeks following the tragedy brought an endless parade of obligations that felt impossibly heavy for Alexander and Isabella to bear. State dinners could not be postponed indefinitely, and diplomatic meetings required their presence. Each public appearance became an exercise in carefully controlled emotion, smiling when expected while dying inside. Isabella struggled most with the well-meaning comments from courtiers and visiting dignitaries. "You're young, you can try again," became a phrase that made her physically ill. Others offered religious platitudes about God's plan that only deepened her sense of abandonment. The assumption that another pregnancy could somehow replace Thomas felt like a betrayal of his memory. Alexander threw himself into royal duties with an intensity that worried those closest to him. He spent 18-hour days reviewing legislation, meeting with ministers, and touring the kingdom's industrial centers. His private secretary, James Morrison, often found him asleep at his desk in the early morning hours, having worked through the night rather than face the empty nursery down the hall from their bedroom. The palace staff walked on eggshells around the grieving couple. Cook prepared Isabella's favorite meals that went untouched. The gardener continued tending the rose garden where Isabella once loved to walk, though she had not visited it since that terrible day. Even the palace dogs seemed to sense the change, lying quietly in corners instead of their usual playful behavior. Queen Evangeline tried desperately to help her daughter-in-law through the darkness. She had experienced her own losses during her younger years and understood the particular pain of losing a child. But Isabella could barely tolerate physical comfort from anyone, even Alexander. Touch reminded her of her body's failure, of the baby she had carried for 7 months who never had the chance to live. The royal physicians recommended counseling, but Isabella refused to speak to strangers about her loss. Dr. Whitmore suggested a change of scenery, perhaps a retreat to one of the kingdom's coastal palaces. Alexander considered the idea, but leaving felt like abandoning Thomas somehow, as if distance might make their son's brief existence even less real. Letters continued arriving daily from citizens sharing their own stories of loss and offering support. Alexander read every single one, finding strange comfort in knowing they were not alone in their grief. A farmer's wife wrote about losing twins during a difficult winter. A merchant described the death of his infant daughter from fever. Each letter reminded him that tragedy touched all lives, not just royal ones. Isabella found herself drawn to the palace library, searching through books about grief and loss. She read accounts of other mothers throughout history who had faced similar tragedies. Queen Victoria's struggles after losing Prince Albert resonated particularly deeply, though Albert had lived to adulthood. The universality of maternal grief across centuries provided small comfort during her darkest moments. The kingdom's newspapers maintained respectful silence about the royal couple's private pain, but international media proved less tactful. Photographers with long lenses tried to capture images of Isabella looking fragile during her few public appearances. Headlines speculated about when they might try for another child, treating their tragedy as merely a temporary setback in the royal succession. Alexander's younger brother, Prince Marcus, tried to provide support while maintaining appropriate distance. He understood that his mere presence served as a reminder of royal continuity, of the fact that the crown would pass to him if Alexander and Isabella remained childless. This unspoken reality added another layer of pressure to their already overwhelming grief. The approaching anniversary of their wedding day loomed like a dark cloud. Last year they had celebrated with joy and anticipation, Isabella already showing with their pregnancy. The thought of acknowledging that date now felt unbearable. Alexander suggested they might travel abroad during that time, but Isabella could not imagine finding the energy to maintain royal composure in foreign courts. Sleep became elusive for both of them. Alexander often found Isabella awake at dawn, standing by their bedroom window watching the sunrise. She told him that nighttime was the hardest, when the palace fell silent and there was nothing to distract from the emptiness where their excitement about Thomas had lived. Dreams were cruel, often featuring the baby they had lost, making each awakening a fresh experience of grief. The royal chaplain, Father Benedict, offered spiritual guidance that felt hollow to both of them. Alexander had been raised with strong faith, but Thomas's death challenged everything he believed about divine providence and royal destiny. Isabella struggled with anger toward God, emotions that felt inappropriate for a future queen but impossible to suppress. As autumn approached, the palace prepared for the traditional harvest festival. In previous years, this celebration had filled the grounds with music, dancing, and joy. The thought of hosting festivities while their hearts remained broken seemed impossible, yet canceling would disappoint thousands of citizens who looked forward to this annual tradition. Alexander and Isabella faced the terrible choice between private grief and public duty, knowing that whatever they decided would affect far more than just themselves. The decision about the harvest festival created the first real conflict between Alexander and Isabella since their tragedy. Alexander believed they needed to fulfill their royal obligations, that the people deserved to see their future king and queen despite personal pain. Isabella felt utterly incapable of pretending joy while her heart remained shattered into pieces. The kingdom needs to see us together, needs to know we're still here for them, Alexander argued gently one evening as they sat in their private sitting room. Canceling the festival would disappoint thousands of families who save all year for this celebration. Isabella looked at him with exhausted eyes. I can barely manage getting dressed each morning, Alex. How can you expect me to smile and wave at crowds when everything inside me feels dead? Her honesty cut through him like a blade, but he knew she spoke only truth. Their first serious argument in months erupted that night. Alexander accused Isabella of hiding from life, while she accused him of caring more about royal duty than their son's memory. Both said things they immediately regretted, words born from grief rather than genuine anger. They slept in separate rooms for the first time in their marriage, each too wounded to apologize. Margaret found Isabella crying in the garden the next morning, sitting beside the fountain where she used to imagine Thomas taking his first steps. The older woman, who had served the royal family for 30 years, finally spoke the words she had been holding back for weeks. Your Highness, I lost a baby too. Many years ago, Margaret said quietly, a little girl who lived just 3 hours. I thought I would never smile again, never find purpose in anything. But grief changes shape over time. It never disappears, but it becomes something you can carry instead of something that destroys you. Isabella looked up, surprised by this revelation. Margaret had never spoken of her own losses, maintaining the professional distance expected of palace staff. This moment of shared human experience provided the first crack in the wall Isabella had built around her heart. Alexander sought comfort in the palace stables, brushing his horse thunder while processing his own confusion. The simple, repetitive motion of grooming helped quiet his racing thoughts. His groom, an elderly man named Patrick, worked nearby in comfortable silence until Alexander finally spoke. I don't know how to help her, Patrick. I don't know how to help myself. Everything I was taught about leadership feels useless when I can't even lead my own wife out of darkness. Alexander's voice broke slightly, revealing the vulnerability he worked so hard to hide from everyone else. Patrick continued working, considering his words carefully. My wife lost 3 babies before our son was born, Your Highness. Took her different amounts of time to heal from each one. The third nearly broke her completely. But she said something once that stayed with me. Grief isn't something you get over. It's something you grow around. The royal physician, Dr. Whitmore, requested a private meeting with Alexander about Isabella's condition. Her refusal to eat properly, combined with sleepless nights and emotional withdrawal, concerned him deeply. He recommended consulting specialists in London who dealt specifically with maternal grief, but knew suggesting this to Isabella required careful handling. Her Highness is experiencing what we call complicated grief, Dr. Whitmore explained. It's normal for loss of this magnitude, but without proper support it can become dangerous to her physical and mental health. She needs professional help, but she has to want it first. Alexander realized he had been so focused on maintaining royal appearances that he had failed to address the severity of Isabella's condition. His own grief had blinded him to how deeply she was suffering. That evening he went to her room and simply held her while she cried, not trying to fix anything or offer solutions, just being present in their shared pain. The conversation about professional help came gradually over several days. Isabella initially resisted, seeing it as admission of weakness or failure, but Alexander's research revealed that many royal women throughout history had sought similar support during times of crisis. Queen Victoria herself had required extensive support after Prince Albert's death, though those details had been kept from public knowledge. Their compromise regarding the harvest festival showed the first sign of healing in their relationship. They would attend the opening ceremony, make brief remarks acknowledging the people's support during their difficult time, but would not participate in the full day of festivities. This allowed them to honor their duty while respecting their emotional limitations. The night before the festival, Isabella made her first visit to Thomas's nursery in weeks. She sat in the rocking chair and spoke aloud to her son for the first time since his death. "Mom and Papa are trying to be brave for you, little one. We're trying to find a way to live with this hole in our hearts where you should be." Alexander found her there an hour later, still talking softly to the empty room. Instead of feeling disturbed by this behavior, he felt relieved. This was the first sign that Isabella was beginning to process their loss, rather than simply enduring it. He sat on the floor beside her chair and added his own whispered words to their son. The morning of the festival dawned bright and clear, nature seeming to mock their inner storms. Isabella wore the blue dress Thomas had kicked against when she was pregnant, finding strange comfort in this connection to him. Alexander chose his father's ceremonial sword, seeking strength from family tradition during this impossible day. As their carriage approached the festival grounds, they could hear the crowds gathering. Children laughed and played while vendors called out their wares. The sound of life continuing despite their personal tragedy felt both comforting and heartbreaking. Alexander squeezed Isabella's hand as they prepared to face their people for the first time since becoming parents, without their child. "Together," he whispered, and for the first time in weeks, Isabella managed a small, genuine smile as she squeezed back. The harvest festival proved to be both more difficult and more healing than either Alexander or Isabella had anticipated. As their carriage rolled through the festival grounds, thousands of citizens lined the pathways. But instead of the usual boisterous cheering, a respectful quiet fell over the crowd. Many held small bouquets of white flowers, a spontaneous tribute that no one had organized but everyone seemed to understand. Isabella nearly broke down at the sight of the flowers, but the genuine love and support radiating from their people gave her strength she did not know she possessed. A small girl, no more than 5 years old, broke from her mother's grasp and ran toward the carriage holding a single white rose. The guards moved to intercede, but Isabella signaled them to stop. "For your baby," the little girl said simply, offering the rose through the carriage window. Isabella accepted it with tears streaming down her face, managing to whisper, "Thank you," before the child scampered back to her mother. Alexander watched his wife clutch that simple flower as if it were the most precious gift she had ever received. Their speech at the opening ceremony was brief but heartfelt. Alexander thanked the people for their support during their time of loss, while Isabella spoke about the comfort they had found in the letters and flowers sent to the palace. Her voice wavered only once when she mentioned that they felt Thomas's presence in the love their people had shown. After the ceremony, instead of immediately returning to the palace as planned, Isabella asked to walk among the festival stalls. Alexander worried this might be too overwhelming, but he recognized something different in her expression, a desire to connect rather than withdraw. They spent an hour moving slowly through the crowds, accepting condolences and sharing brief conversations with citizens who had experienced similar losses. An elderly woman approached Isabella near the herb vendor's stall, taking her hands and weathered fingers. "I lost 3 babies, Your Highness, 40 years ago. The pain never fully goes away, but it becomes a different kind of love. Love that exists without needing the person to be here. Your little prince will always be your first child, always be part of your story." These words resonated so deeply with Isabella that she repeated them to Alexander during their carriage ride back to the palace. For the first time since Thomas's death, she seemed to find comfort in speaking about him rather than avoiding his memory. She realized that honoring their son's brief existence might be more healing than trying to forget the pain of losing him. That evening, Isabella made a decision that surprised even herself. She asked Alexander to help her sort through the gifts that had been sent for Thomas. Instead of packing everything away as they had planned, she wanted to select special items to donate to families in need. The idea of other babies benefiting from the love people had shown their son felt like a meaningful way to honor his memory. They spent hours in the nursery together, examining each carefully chosen gift. A hand-knitted blanket from an elderly woman in the countryside would go to the foundling hospital. Wooden toys carved by local craftsmen would bring joy to children in the kingdom's orphanages. Books of lullabies and fairy tales would stock the libraries in schools serving poor communities. Alexander watched Isabella transform during this process. Instead of viewing Thomas's things as painful reminders of loss, she began seeing them as opportunities to spread the love their son had inspired. Her face, which had been etched with anguish for weeks, showed the first glimmers of purpose and peace he had seen since their tragedy occurred. The decision to seek professional help came more easily after the festival experience. Isabella realized that healing did not mean forgetting Thomas or betraying his memory. A specialist in maternal grief, Dr. Eleanor Hartwell, traveled discreetly from London to begin private sessions with Isabella. These conversations, held in the garden pavilion where Isabella felt most comfortable, slowly began to untangle the complex emotions surrounding their loss. Dr. Hartwell helped Isabella understand that her feelings of guilt and failure were common, but unfounded. The complications that led to Thomas's death had nothing to do with anything she had done or failed to do. Learning to separate rational understanding from emotional responsibility became a crucial part of Isabella's healing process. Alexander, meanwhile, worked with Father Benedict to plan a private memorial service for Thomas. This would not be the grand state affair that protocol might suggest, but an intimate ceremony in the palace chapel for close family and staff who had shared in their joy and sorrow. The service would celebrate Thomas's brief existence rather than dwelling only on their loss. The date chosen for the memorial held special significance. It would have been Thomas's first-month birthday. Isabella initially felt uncertain about marking this day, worried it might intensify their grief. But Dr. Hartwell encouraged her to think of it as giving Thomas a place in their family history, acknowledging his importance to their lives despite his short time with them. Alexander commissioned a beautiful stained glass window for the chapel, depicting a small angel surrounded by roses, Thomas's birth flower. The inscription would read simply, "Prince Thomas Alexander, beloved son, with his birth date." Isabella wept when she saw the design, but these were tears of gratitude rather than despair. As the memorial service approached, both Alexander and Isabella found themselves feeling something they had not experienced since the tragedy, anticipation mixed with peace. They were nervous about facing their emotions in a formal setting, but they also felt ready to honor their son publicly and begin integrating his memory into their ongoing lives. The guest list included only their immediate family, key palace staff who had known about the pregnancy from the beginning, and Dr. Whitmore, who had fought so hard to save Thomas. Each person invited had played a role in their journey to parenthood and deserved to be part of saying goodbye. The night before the service, Isabella and Alexander sat together in the nursery one last time, before beginning the process of transforming it into a different kind of memorial space. They lit a candle for Thomas and spoke about their hopes for the future, not to replace him but to build a life that honored his memory while allowing space for healing and possibly, someday, new joy. The morning of Thomas's memorial service dawned gray and misty, the autumn air carrying the scent of falling leaves and approaching winter. Isabella woke before dawn, feeling surprisingly calm after weeks of anxiety about this day. She had chosen to wear the same blue dress she wore when they first felt Thomas kick, wanting to connect with the joy he had brought them during his time in her womb. Alexander found her in the garden at sunrise, sitting on their favorite bench and holding the white rose the little girl had given her at the festival. The flower had been carefully pressed and preserved, becoming a symbol of how their people had embraced their grief with love rather than pity. "Are you ready for this?" Alexander asked gently, sitting beside her and taking her free hand. "I think so," Isabella replied, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "Dr. Hartwell helped me understand that today isn't about saying goodbye to Thomas. It's about saying hello to a new way of loving him, a way that doesn't require his physical presence but honors his place in our family." The chapel looked beautiful in the soft morning light. Queen Evangeline had personally arranged white roses throughout the space, their petals seeming to glow against the ancient stone walls. The new stained glass window cast colored patterns across the altar, and many guests commented quietly about how perfectly it captured the gentle spirit they imagined Thomas possessed. Father Benedict had worked closely with Isabella and Alexander to create a service that celebrated life rather than dwelling on death. Instead of traditional funeral hymns, they chose music that spoke of hope and eternal love. Alexander's sister, Princess Catherine, sang a lullaby their mother had sung to them as children, her beautiful voice echoing through the sacred space. Isabella surprised everyone, including herself, by choosing to speak during the service. She had not planned to say anything, but sitting in that chapel surrounded by love, she felt compelled to share her thoughts about their son. Her words were simple but profound, speaking about how Thomas had taught them that love does not require duration to be meaningful. "Our son lived for 7 months in my heart and in our dreams," Isabella said, her voice clear despite her tears. "He was real to us, beloved by us, and remains part of us. His life may have been brief, but his impact on our lives and on this kingdom will last forever. He brought us together in new ways, showed us depths of love we never knew existed, and connected us to every parent who has ever lost a child." Alexander spoke about legacy and continuity, explaining how Thomas had already changed them as people and as future rulers. Their son's brief existence had deepened their empathy and understanding of human suffering, qualities that would make them better servants to their people. In losing Thomas, they had gained insight into the preciousness of life and the importance of supporting families facing similar tragedies. The service concluded with each guest lighting a small candle for Thomas, creating a warm glow throughout the chapel. As they filed out, many stopped to embrace Alexander and Isabella, sharing their own stories of loss and healing. Dr. Whitmore, normally a reserved man, had tears in his eyes as he told them how honored he felt to have fought for Thomas's life, even though he could not save it. Following the service, the family gathered for a private luncheon in the palace's small dining room. For the first time in months, genuine laughter was heard within the palace walls. Alexander's brother Marcus shared amusing stories from their childhood, while Queen Evangeline spoke about her own pregnancy experiences with warmth rather than sadness. Isabella found herself enjoying food for the first time since losing Thomas. The simple act of tasting flavors and feeling nourished reminded her that her body was healing along with her heart. She caught Alexander watching her eat with relief and love in his eyes, making her realize how worried he had been about her physical decline. That afternoon, they began the planned transformation of Thomas's nursery. Instead of a traditional baby's room, they created a peaceful meditation space where they could feel close to their son. The crib was replaced with comfortable chairs, while his clothes were carefully folded in a beautiful cedar chest that would preserve them. The mobile of stars and moons remained, catching light from the windows and casting gentle shadows around the room. Isabella placed the pressed white rose in a silver frame on a small table. Beside their favorite photograph from her pregnancy, the ultrasound image where Thomas appeared to be waving. Other mementos joined it: a letter from the little girl who had given her the rose, a poem written by a grieving mother from the countryside, and a small wooden star Alexander had carved during one of his sleepless nights. The evening brought their first peaceful dinner together since the tragedy. They talked about their plans for the winter months, including a possible trip to the kingdom's mountain retreat, where they could continue healing in private. Isabella expressed interest in visiting the Foundling Hospital, where they had donated Thomas's gifts. Wanting to see how their son's memory was, bringing comfort to other children, Alexander shared his thoughts about establishing a foundation in Thomas's name to support families dealing with pregnancy loss and infant death. This idea excited Isabella, giving them a meaningful way to channel their grief into helping others facing similar heartbreak. They envisioned support groups, research funding, and educational programs that could honor their son's memory while preventing other families from suffering alone. As they prepared for bed, Isabella realized this was the first day since losing Thomas that she had not felt consumed by despair. The pain remained, probably always would, but it no longer felt like it was destroying her. Instead, it was becoming part of her story, a chapter that had changed her profoundly but would not define her entire life. Alexander noticed the change too, seeing glimpses of the vibrant woman he had fallen in love with returning gradually. Isabella's laughter, when it came, sounded genuine rather than forced. Her interest in the world beyond their immediate grief was slowly reawakening, bringing hope that they could build a meaningful life that honored Thomas while allowing for future happiness. They fell asleep holding hands for the first time since the tragedy, both feeling that while they would never stop missing their son, they had taken the first real steps toward learning how to live with love instead of being paralyzed by loss. The healing process would continue for years, But today had marked a crucial turning point in their journey from devastation toward acceptance and renewed purpose. Winter settled over Raven's Hollow Palace like a gentle blanket, bringing with it a slower pace that allowed Alexander and Isabella to continue their healing journey without the pressure of constant public appearances. The shorter days and longer nights that had once felt oppressive now provided welcome cocoons for reflection and quiet growth. Isabella's sessions with Dr. Hartwell had evolved from desperate attempts to function into meaningful explorations of how grief could coexist with hope. They worked together to develop healthy coping mechanisms and to understand that healing did not mean forgetting Thomas or minimizing the impact of their loss. These conversations took place twice weekly in the transformed nursery, which had become Isabella's sanctuary rather than a source of pain. Alexander threw himself into planning the Thomas Foundation with an energy that surprised everyone around him. He met with ministers, charitable organizations, and medical experts to create a comprehensive support system for families experiencing pregnancy loss. The foundation would provide counseling services, research funding, and practical support like funeral expenses for families who could not afford proper farewells for their lost children. The royal couple's first major public appearance since the memorial service came at the annual Children's Hospital Christmas celebration. Isabella had initially been terrified of being around babies and young children, fearing it would trigger overwhelming grief. But Dr. Hartwell encouraged her to face these fears gradually, explaining that avoiding all reminders of children would only strengthen her trauma rather than helping her heal. As they walked through the hospital wards, Isabella surprised herself by feeling joy at the sight of recovering children playing with new toys. A 6-year-old girl named Emma, recovering from surgery, showed Isabella her collection of stuffed animals and chattered about wanting to be a princess when she grew up. Instead of pain, Isabella felt a warm connection to this bright child and promised to send her some books about real princesses from history. Alexander watched his wife interact with the children with wonder and relief. He had worried that being around other people's healthy children would be too painful for her, but instead it seemed to awaken her maternal instincts in a new way. She began asking about starting a reading program at the hospital, wanting to bring stories and magic to children facing difficult medical journeys. The foundation work led to their first joint interview since Thomas's death, conducted by a trusted journalist who had covered the royal family respectfully for decades. They spoke honestly about their grief journey, hoping their openness would help other families feel less alone. Isabella's candid discussion about the darkness she had experienced, combined with her message of hope, resonated with parents across the kingdom and beyond. Losing Thomas taught us that love doesn't end when life does, Isabella explained during the interview. Our son will always be our first child, always be part of our family story, but we've learned that honoring his memory means living fully, not hiding from life because it can be painful. Alexander added, "Grief changed us, but it also opened our hearts in ways we never expected. We understand suffering differently now, which makes us better leaders and better people. Thomas's legacy isn't just in our hearts. It's in every family the foundation helps." Every conversation started about pregnancy loss. Every person who feels less alone because we shared our story. The interview sparked an enormous response from the public. Letters poured in from families sharing their own experiences with pregnancy loss, infant death, and the long journey of healing. Many expressed gratitude for seeing their future king and queen speak so honestly about tragedy and recovery. Others shared how the foundation's early programs had already begun helping them process their own grief. As spring approached, Isabella made a decision that both excited and terrified her. She wanted to try for another baby. The choice came not from a desire to replace Thomas, but from a renewed appreciation for the gift of potential life. Dr. Hartwell had prepared her for this moment, explaining that many women who experience pregnancy loss eventually feel ready to try again, not to fill the void left by their lost child, but to honor their capacity for love. Alexander's reaction mixed joy with concern. He wanted another child desperately, but he feared losing Isabella to the darkness again if they faced another tragedy. They spent long conversations discussing their fears, hopes, and the practical realities of pregnancy after loss. Dr. Whitmore assured them that Isabella's previous complications were unlikely to recur, but they all understood that pregnancy would carry increased anxiety. The decision to try again sparked intense discussions about privacy versus public transparency. Their people had supported them through Thomas's loss with incredible grace, but another pregnancy would bring renewed attention and pressure. They ultimately decided that honesty had served them well so far, though they would wait longer before making any announcements. Isabella's first positive pregnancy test came on a quiet Tuesday morning in early spring. She stared at the 2 pink lines for a full 5 minutes before calling for Alexander, her emotions swinging wildly between elation and terror. When he saw the test, Alexander's first reaction was to hold her tightly while they both cried, tears of joy mixed with memories of the happiness they had felt with Thomas. This pregnancy felt completely different from their first. Where they had been blissfully confident before, now they were cautiously hopeful. Isabella's appointments with Dr. Whitmore increased to weekly visits, with additional monitoring that helped ease their anxiety. Every milestone passed, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, brought a mixture of relief and renewed worry about the milestones still ahead. They kept the pregnancy secret for the first 3 months, sharing the news only with their immediate family and closest staff. Queen Evangeline wept with joy, but also expressed the same protective concerns that Alexander carried. The memory of Isabella's collapse after losing Thomas made everyone more cautious about celebrating too early or too enthusiastically. The baby's first ultrasound appointment brought both parents to tears when they heard the strong, steady heartbeat echoing through the examination room. Isabella gripped Alexander's hand so tightly she left marks, both of them remembering Thomas's ultrasounds and marveling at this new little life growing inside her. The technician, aware of their history, gave them extra time to absorb the reality of this healthy pregnancy. As Isabella entered her second trimester, they began discussing when to share their news with the kingdom. The Thomas Foundation was thriving, their public appearances had resumed their normal schedule, and Isabella felt emotionally stronger than she had in over a year. They decided to announce the pregnancy at the Foundation's first annual fundraising gala, turning the event into a celebration of both Thomas's memory and new hope for the future. The night before the announcement, they sat together in their transformed meditation room, surrounded by Thomas's memory and filled with cautious excitement about his sibling. They spoke to Thomas about the new baby, promising him that this child would know about their older brother and understand the love that had created the foundation bearing his name. For the first time since losing him, they felt that their family story was continuing rather than ending, with Thomas remaining an integral part of their growing legacy. The Thomas Foundation Gala proved to be a perfect setting for sharing their hopeful news with the kingdom. Isabella wore a flowing emerald gown that concealed her growing belly, until the moment she and Alexander chose to reveal their secret. The event had raised unprecedented funds for families dealing with pregnancy loss, and their announcement created an atmosphere of pure joy that honored both Thomas's memory and new life growing within Isabella. Tonight, we celebrate the incredible impact our son Thomas has had on this kingdom through your generosity and support. Alexander began his speech. His brief life continues to touch families across our land and beyond. And now, Isabella and I are blessed to share that Thomas will be a big brother. As we are expecting another child this autumn, the ballroom erupted in thunderous applause and tears of joy from guests who had witnessed the royal couple's journey through devastating loss toward renewed hope. Isabella placed her hand on her belly as she spoke about how this pregnancy represented not a replacement for Thomas, but an expansion of the love he had taught them was possible. The public reaction to their announcement exceeded even their most optimistic expectations. The kingdom erupted in celebration, with spontaneous street parties and church bells ringing across the land. But what touched Alexander and Isabella most deeply were the thousands of letters from families who had found hope in their story, parents who had lost children and found courage to try again, couples who had thought their grief would never end but now saw possibility for healing. Isabella's second pregnancy progressed with careful monitoring and abundant support. Dr. Whitmore arranged for the kingdom's most advanced prenatal care, while Dr. Hartwell continued helping Isabella process the complex emotions of expecting again after loss. Each appointment brought relief as the baby continued developing normally, but also triggered memories of Thomas's pregnancy that required ongoing emotional work. The palace staff, who had mourned with the royal couple during their darkest days, now found renewed joy in their work. Cook began preparing Isabella's favorite pregnancy foods, while the gardener planted a new section of the rose garden in anticipation of the baby's arrival. The entire palace seemed to come alive again with purpose and hope. Alexander found himself constantly torn between excitement and protective fear. He arranged for backup medical teams to be available at all times, insisted on additional safety measures, and struggled to balance reasonable precautions with the anxiety that threatened to consume him. Isabella often had to remind him that this baby deserved their joy, not just their fear. As Isabella entered her third trimester, they made the difficult but meaningful decision to use the same nursery where they had once prepared for Thomas. With Dr. Hartwell's guidance, they transformed the meditation space back into a baby's room, but with important differences. Thomas's memory remained present through the preserved ultrasound photo and the pressed white rose, while new preparations surrounded these mementos with love for his sibling. The final weeks of pregnancy brought a mixture of excitement and terror that tested everything they had learned about managing anxiety and finding hope amid uncertainty. Isabella's labor began 3 weeks before her due date, sending Alexander into a panic, despite Dr. Whitmore's assurances that this timing was perfectly normal and safe. Princess Charlotte Rose entered the world on a crisp October morning, announcing her arrival with strong cries that filled the delivery room with relief and joy. Alexander wept openly as he held his daughter for the first time, while Isabella marveled at the tiny, perfect features of their living child. After months of careful hope, Charlotte's safe arrival felt like a miracle. The kingdom's celebration of Charlotte's birth was tempered with beautiful acknowledgement of Thomas's continued place in the royal family. Official announcements described Charlotte as the second child and first daughter of the crown prince and princess, ensuring Thomas's role as eldest child remained recognized. Church services across the land offered prayers of thanksgiving, while also remembering families still waiting for their own miracles. Isabella's recovery proved remarkably smooth, both physically and emotionally. The joy of caring for Charlotte combined with the grief work she had done over the past 2 years allowed her to embrace motherhood fully without forgetting her first child. She often spoke to Charlotte about her big brother Thomas, creating a family narrative that included both children from the beginning. The Thomas Foundation reached new heights of success following Charlotte's birth, as the royal couple's story of loss and eventual healing inspired unprecedented support for their cause. Research funded by the foundation led to medical advances that prevented some types of pregnancy complications, while their support programs helped thousands of families navigate their own journeys through loss. Charlotte's first public appearance came at the traditional blessing ceremony in the palace chapel, held beneath the stained glass window created in Thomas's memory. As Father Benedict spoke about new life and eternal love, sunlight streamed through Thomas's window, casting rainbow patterns across his sister's christening gown. Isabella and Alexander exchanged meaningful looks, feeling their son's presence blessing this moment of joy. As Charlotte grew from infant to toddler, her parents marveled at her sunny disposition and fearless approach to life. She seemed to embody the resilience they had fought so hard to develop, bringing laughter and chaos back to palace halls that had been too quiet for too long. Alexander often found himself thinking that Charlotte carried something of Thomas's spirit, not as his replacement but as his legacy of love made manifest. The meditation room where they had once sat with Thomas's memory became Charlotte's favorite playroom, filled with toys and books but still containing the small memorial table with her brother's ultrasound picture. As she grew old enough to ask questions, Isabella and Alexander spoke simply and honestly about the brother she would never meet, but who loved her from heaven. Years later, as they watched Charlotte play in the garden where they had once grieved so deeply, Alexander and Isabella reflected on the journey that had brought them from devastating loss to profound healing. They had learned that grief and joy could coexist, that love transcended physical presence, and that broken hearts could mend while still holding sacred spaces for those they had lost. The palace that had once echoed with their tears now rang with Charlotte's laughter, but Thomas's memory remained woven throughout their daily lives. His foundation continued changing laws and saving lives. His window still cast beautiful light in the chapel, and his parents had become advocates for every family facing the unthinkable loss of a child. Their story became a beacon of hope across the kingdom and beyond, proof that even the deepest grief could eventually transform into a different kind of love, and that healing was possible without forgetting. The prince and princess who had once felt their world ending had discovered that love, once created, never truly dies but simply changes form, continuing to touch lives and create meaning in ways they never could have imagined during their darkest days.